Hey, Alex, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Always good to see you.
All right, I want to get into the MAHA movement, the nominees, the agenda. I mean, that's the good stuff. That's what everyone wants. But I just got to say, like, I remember having a conversation with Charlie Kirk, and you had just started your show, the first one, and I said to Charlie, I love what you guys are doing here, and I love the person you've got going. And I don't even know that I really knew your name. I saw Poplitics come out. It was this Instagram and video stuff about pop culture for younger kids. Now I'm an old fuddy dud, but I was like, I said, this is exactly the right thing. You guys are reaching people where they are on issues they care about, and you've got somebody that can speak their language. And so I was so excited how you grew, like that show. And 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 so the thing that's interesting to me is I've kind of been reading and watching your shift over to this new show. Just explain to me. I mean, you kind of did what so many people want to do. You had success on a platform, you got a lot of people, and then you shifted. Like, explain why.
Well, because I saw the data in my own show numbers. So I started with Turning Point when I was in my mid 20s. And my show, what Sean's discussing, is my pop culture show. That's what I had started with Turning Point USA. And that was fun. And I love talking about celebrity news and pop culture and who's dating who and, whatever. And I think that show served a really important purpose during the pandemic because we had a lot of celebrities saying asinine things. I was able to say, did you see what Kylie Jenner said about Black Lives Matter, for example? Here's why she's wrong. This is a Marxist movement. You should know about it. Things like that. It was a really good entry point into conservatism. But, that's going on 5 years ago now. And so as I'm getting older, I'm in my early 30s. My audience is also in their early 30s. There's other topics that are becoming important to us. The health issues in this country were one of them. And my audience is 90% female, Sean. They are majority right leaning. I could see the data in my own numbers on my podcast. When I would talk about health and wellness, my downloads would basically triple. So I was saying to Charlie Kirk behind the scenes, we have something here. This is really important. I mean, just me on my own, I'm like very interested in this, but I've always had a really good inclination for whatever I'm interested in. Typically, my audience is also, and that was the case. They were also gravitating towards this information that historically conservatives just didn't really care about. It really was more crunchy liberal female voters that cared about things like GMOs and organic foods. This is really the first time the right has been interested. And a lot of that we can paint on, the pandemic and mandating a vaccine. That was for me anyway, which I may have talked about on your show before. But for me, that was what was the catalyst for me to become interested in food and pharma in the first place. And they were all following suit. So this summer, in the summer of 2024, we host a big young women's conference at Turning Point USA every single June. And I had told Charlie Kirk, I said, I want this whole summit almost exclusively, 95% of it to be focused on health. Now, some people thought I was a little bit crazy. They didn't understand. Remember, this is before MAHA. MAHA happens in August. So in June, I'm saying all the topics should be about health. This is going to be the next cornerstone of the conservative movement. And they were like, okay, we'll let you do this, but we think this is nuts. Did it. 2 months later, RFK endorses Trump. Health and wellness becomes one of the biggest driving forces with the female vote for the Trump campaign. I'm not saying that I am a wizard, but I'm also not saying I'm not.
Okay, can you do Powerball numbers? Because I feel like but see, I love that because so there's two things that you said that pop out at me. Like, number one, I love my gut feelings about things. Like, I'm like, you know what people are craving is that they want this, but then the data is what drives everything. And I know people around me get tired of me saying it, but the data doesn't lie. I mean, at some point, like, if people want something, when I do a show sometimes and I watch the interest of it, it pops. Okay, clearly there was interest in that, right? Conversely, there's things I really sometimes think are interesting, and I'll watch the numbers and I'll be like, wow, that sucked. And data doesn't lie. It is what it is. People either really liked it. So what was it like? You said COVID did it. What was it during COVID where you said, wow, this doesn't make sense, or this is not what I was told I was supposed to believe growing up?
Well, like I said, conservatives basically kind of ignored the health stuff. We kind of thought, I think we thought of it as like very new age conspiratorial. We just thought GMOs and things didn't matter, weren't real, vaccines safe and effective. We, for some reason, conservatives, we've always questioned the government in all these other areas, media, education, for example, but we just didn't really draw the connecting line between our food supply and also pharmaceutical companies and healthcare and what we're told to take or not take. And so that mandated vaccine and being told, for a lot of us, well, it's your choice to get this or not, but you're going to lose your job if you don't. It's your choice to get this or not, but you're not going to be allowed. You're not going to be allowed in certain public spaces without it. I personally was kicked off of of the public hotel in New York City. They have like a beautiful restaurant rooftop bar on at their hotel. And during the pandemic, I was escorted out. They threatened to call the police on me because they realized I was using a fake vaccine card. That was an outdoor establishment on the roof. Anyway, so all of
you can vandalize a building, but you can't use a vaccine card that's not legit.
Yeah. So all of that was super strange. And I just thought, like, why am I willing to question so much? I know how corrupt the government is when they get involved in all these other things. So why wouldn't I be questioning it when it comes to food and pharma? And so, yeah, that was really what did it for me. And I think for my audience, I remember right before 2020. So I launched my first show with Turning Point in 2019, the fall of 2019. So this is a couple months before the pandemic. In those couple months, the conversations in the Facebook fan groups for my show amongst these female conservative voters were all, anyone who doesn't fully vaccinate their children is like a kook, crazy, that's nuts. Right after the pandemic, the entire conversation shifted. So yeah, I wasn't the only one. And, let me remind you, the female vote went up for Trump 15 points.
So I asked that question not just because I think a lot of people have interest in who you are and your journey, but because for a lot of us, we've had a similar evolution. Like, I don't think if you asked me a year ago about half of this, I would agree with the first part of your statement. I was like, whatever. But here's where I sort of have a little bit of a difference. I agree with you. Most conservatives are skeptical of the government. But what we've never been is skeptical of our doctors. And I think in listening to your podcast and some of the interviews that you have, one of the things that I've realized is that I don't know whether it's, I wouldn't want to impugn the integrity of doctors, but like I started to listen to like Casey Means, right? And you start to realize that these doctors they were never trained. Like they're just sort of taking what they were told is the answer to so many problems, or that they should never question things. So when I ask my doctor something, I go, oh, well, my doctor told me it was okay, or my doctor told me yes. So I trust them. But then I've started to realize through a lot of the stuff that you've posted, the interviews that you've had with some of these folks, I go, wait a second. Most of these doctors have never been trained in something as basic as nutrition.
Yeah, if you ask the average physician, just ask them next time you go to your family physician for a wellness visit or whatever for you or your kid, just say, out of curiosity, how much nutrition training did you get when you were in med school? Just see what they say. They will all say a day or less, sometimes zero. A day or less, or sometimes zero. That is and then ask them, in comparison, how much time they spent learning about pharmaceutical options for their patients. Yeah. I think that you will be really surprised. If you're skeptical about all this health stuff, you think Sean Spicer's lost it, you think Alex Clark has lost it, ask your doctor yourself how much time spent learning different things about pharmaceuticals versus nutrition in med school.
You know what, though? It's funny, though. I went in and got a physical, I don't know, probably a month and a half ago. And I've had the doctor for a little while. But knowing what I know now, I kind of was like, I want to see how this goes. And I walked in, and the first thing that, my doctor stood in front, how's things going? And they literally had their pad out, their prescription pad. And the answer was just, tell me what's wrong, okay? And then it would be like, okay. And then by the end of it, it's like, all right, so I've prescribed you this for this, and then what I'm going to do is prescribe you that. Like, it wasn't, and I started to realize, wow, this is really true. Like, it's not even, I didn't even ask the nutrition question, but I realized that the default is, tell me what's wrong, there's a pill for that. Tell me what's wrong, there's a pill for that. Tell me what's wrong, there's a pill for that. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't need any, I'm watching this in practice now. And I get it, certain things you do need a pill for whatever reason, or maybe that's the most expeditious way of solving a problem. But the default on everything isn't, well, you can eat better and alleviate a lot of these problems. It's, we're going to give you a pill that will alleviate the high blood pressure that was caused by you eating all these things that caused it in the first place, as opposed to trying to solve what Kamala Harris would say, the root cause.
Right. And you have to understand that your doctor, the average doctor, they genuinely think that they're helping. This is what they were
Right.
taught. So they don't realize that this was all a business. The people who are funding the medical schools, it's all a business endeavor. It's not really about patient health. Now, for them individually, it might be. They genuinely might be like, okay, me giving you statins, I'm really helping you. And I do believe that the majority of our medical professionals do have our best interest in heart. They just don't know any better. That's the sad thing. But I mean, one indicator too that all of this was such a massive needle mover for a bipartisan effort and a bipartisan vote for Trump. I was invited when the MAHA movement started in August. I was invited on more mainstream media shows and podcasts in the health space than ever after this happened. People that would never have talked to me before all wanted to have me on. Actress Maria Menounos invited me on her podcast to talk about this. Her audience are all Hollywood celebrity friends of hers and liberal moms. And like I said, we saw the female vote go up 15 points for Trump. Now, we don't know exclusively why he gained 15 points among women, but I believe it was this. And I think that the biggest, most important thing to get across to our regular schmegular politicians in the Republican Party is that the GOP just gained millions of new female voters this year. If we keep health and taking care of nature and our environment in the not Green New Deal way, I'm talking about loving and taking care of nature and our body in the God gave us way, we will maintain these women throughout the next 4 years and hopefully for long after that. But it's almost like we just had a really good first date with female voters as the Republican Party. Do not mess it up. Don't wait longer than 3 days to call her, right? Like, don't only send her Instagram reels and not actually send a text or a phone call and set up a second date. We need to keep courting these female voters. We have a lot riding on them, especially with all the abortion stuff. The left thought that was going to be the reason that Trump would lose was all of the abortion talk. But it turns out the average female American voter cares more about affording to put food on her table and what the food is that's going on her table than killing her kids. So that's really important. We need to take that and run with it.
So how excited are you about RFK? I mean, I think to your point, MAHA comes to on the scene in late summer. RFK endorses Trump, and suddenly we're talking about this in a way. I mean, to your point, like I see it everywhere now. And so how excited are you that he's going to shake, and hopeful are you that he can shake up the system?
Oh my gosh. This is unprecedented. Bobby Kennedy was given a very serious directive from President Trump.
And on day one, we're going to declare an emergency like we did in COVID. But it's going to be a chronic disease emergency.
Get corruption out of our health agencies, create uncompromised evidence-based research for health guidelines, and show an undeniable reverse in the chronic disease epidemic in just the first 2 years. That's not even including all 4 years, but President Trump very seriously, he has this, did you see, he wants to do this like nationwide carnival tour or something. I mean, only President Trump would think of this. It's like to celebrate America's 250th birthday or whatever. It's like the biggest birthday party. And so he wants to like go around the country and have all these fun things. And he wants as many American people healthy and able to attend as possible. So he told Bobby Kennedy, hey, you need to make sure that we can see that there is a difference. People are improving within 2 years so they can attend my birthday party. And I think that's very quintessential Trump and very fun. I mean, he is a showman, right? And so this is like a really fun like goal that he has set. But let me tell you why, Sean, RFK Jr. must be confirmed by the Senate, because remember, he still has to get confirmed by the Senate, to those watching. So we need to all be calling our senators and demanding, hey, we want you to confirm RFK Jr. This is really important to us. So 50% of the FDA's budget is paid by pharma. 55% of the FDA advisory committee members have profited off companies whose chemicals and drugs were under their review. Then you have the pharmaceutical industry paid over $1 billion to reviewers at top medical journals between 2020 and 2022. And this also floored me. 95% of the members of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, the committee that is helping decide our school lunch program, for example, in public schools, had connections or conflicts of interest with food or pharmaceutical industries. So out of the 20 members on the committee, 19 had at least one tie to an industry actor, and over half of the committee members had multiple ties. One member, Sean, had 152 instances of conflicts of interest.
So how does a guy, I mean, I've been in and out of politics for 30 years. I think RFK is a breath of fresh air and he's going to shake things up. But the swamp knows how to fight, Alex, and they fight hard. And I look at the amount of money that pharma spends on politics. And I honestly, like, I wonder right now, are they sitting back going, okay, we see you, Bobby Kennedy, and we raise you. And because I feel like they're going to start spreading out money and saying, hey, Congressman, we're giving you a $10,000 check, a $20,000 check, whatever it is. But, we can't change this because we've got this system greased right now, right? And that's what I wonder. All these conflicts. I mean, again, I listen to this stuff and I'm like, no kidding that they get away with this. They're like, they got this stuff in the pipeline and then they basically pay the people to review it. And it's like, no kidding, you got it through. So how hard do you think it's going to be to do this?
You would understand this more even than I would because you've been a part of a Trump administration before. But this was something, when I heard this, I thought, okay, President Trump, I mean, there's so many reasons he is just the coolest president ever, but this really spoke to his integrity, I think. So President Trump is very aware that what you just described, the sharks are circling. They're really angling for their moment to get in here. Obviously, that's why there's been emergency meetings between the food and pharma companies in the last couple weeks since the election, really freaking out and planning like, what the heck are we going to do if RFK Jr. gets confirmed? So before the election, before a presidential candidate is elected, when it comes to setting up your transition team and the people that you want doing different things, you're kind of waiting on that moment of being officially elected, and then you get government money to use on that transition team and hiring people and putting them to work, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what President Trump did before he was officially elected, because he was like, I don't want to take a chance. I want to make sure that we are totally insulated by the corruption and the deep state and all of these sharks in food and pharma. Because the MAHA movement is so important to me, I'm going to be funding my entire transition team myself. In that way, he was able to put Bobby Kennedy to work, Tulsi Gabbard to work, Elon Musk to work. Everybody was able to start doing what they wanted to do before waiting on that government funding after being officially elected, so that then people couldn't come in and say, well, you're using government money, you have to use me, you have to listen to me.
Right.
So this was something that President Trump did that was super unique, historical. It had never been done before. And that's a really good question to ask somebody else that's way closer to the Trump campaign about this, but it was a really historic move. And so that gave me hope, Sean, personally, that, okay, he really meant what he said when he went on Joe Rogan and said, one of the biggest mistakes I made was just not having a total understanding of, I knew I wanted to drain the swamp. I didn't know how hard it was going to be. I didn't know how easy it was for people to infiltrate and kind of undermine me. And he said, that was one of the biggest lessons he learned from his first term or first presidency. And so I really believe that he is trying to do everything he can to prevent something like that from happening again. So, what I can say about RFK Jr. is that America as we know it is truly about to be forever changed for the better. It's very similar to like the pandemic, the America that we had, or 9/11, America before 9/11, post 9/11, there was a noticeable difference. America before the pandemic, after the pandemic, noticeable difference. This election is going to be similar in that we are going to be looking at a completely different landscape of culture as we know it, society as we know it, American health as we know it, where young people especially will be able to tell their grandkids like, oh, I remember when President Trump got elected in 2024 and RFK Jr. started making these changes. And I've been telling people, keep a diary, keep a journal, because people are going to want to know like what changed, how were things different on a day-to-day basis. So get ready for January. It's going to be super exciting.
All right, so RFK calls you and says, Alex Clark, I listen to your podcast all the time. I love the interviews you're having. I need to kind of get my priorities straight for January 20th. What are the top 5 things that I need to do day one? Go.
Okay, eliminating herbicides and pesticides being used on our crops. We've got dead zones in the ocean. Only jellyfish are able to survive. We've got all these fish dying. It's because of the runoff from these pesticides, herbicides, all the sides, right? It's killing everything. It's killing our gut bacteria, the nutritional value of our food, cutting subsidies from our farmers. Let's incentivize farmers to be farming healthier food, not food used in ultra processed or ingredients used in ultra processed food. Let's start testing the vaccines rigorously as we should. Let's start recalibrating who's in charge of things with the FDA and the CDC, and looking at conflicts of interest between the food and pharma. You shouldn't, with Oxycontin, we had the guy who was advising and saying that Oxycontin was safe, then immediately going and working for Purdue Pharma. Those levels of corruption, that shouldn't be happening. I want to fix our school lunches, which I know he's going to do. That's a huge thing. So many kids in America, the only food that they're really getting, almost all of their diet is happening for breakfast and lunch when they're at school. Some of them don't even get dinner. So the least we could do is provide them with food that's going to help them grow healthy and learn to the best of their ability. Did I hit 5?
That's 4. So you got one more.
4, one more.
What about TV advertising? I know that.
Yes. And then that's one of the first things that's going to happen, of course, which he's already on board for, is we're not going to allow in America anymore pharmaceutical companies to advertise on TV, not because they're doing that so that we are going to our doctor and saying, hey, I'd really like to take Ozempic, for example. It's because they're spending over $1 billion a month on ad revenue for news stations. And therefore the news stations feel like they can't be honest and report the truth when it comes to drugs and side effects and other data coming out about things like vaccines. That's why during the pandemic, you had mainstream media and also social media companies censoring things about vitamin D, for example, going outside, getting fresh air, sunlight, things that we know helped curb COVID, but it wasn't being talked about. Also why information about ivermectin was being hidden is because when you have an alternative, I'm saying this wrong, but when you have an alternative available, then you can't expedite the emergency status of a vaccine if there's like another option. And so that's why they didn't want any news about ivermectin. That type of corruption is about to end for the first time in America. It's glorious.
You know what? You mentioned the media. Number one, I've started to screenshot this when I see it, but it's not just the TV ads that I think we're all familiar with. But go look at Politico or Axios, what a lot of lawmakers read. And look who's sponsoring it. It's pharma. It's the drug companies, which, by the way, wink, nod, the journalists will always say, oh, well, that we don't get influenced by that. Really? You don't wonder who's paying your salary? You don't wonder about whether or not there'll be cuts if you don't get some of these advertisers in the door? I mean, how does that, either you're really that stupid or you don't understand who's paying the bills?
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that you have a lot of people in Congress that are really at a loss. They're like, okay, my background is military, for example. I don't know anything about food or pharma. And if some lobbyist is telling me, hey, look at this new study from, I don't know where, this nutrition school that's totally bought by Big Pharma, saying that Lucky Charms are healthier than ground beef. I mean, this is what the science is showing. This is what the data is showing. And so those poor people in Congress are going, well, I guess if this is what you're telling me, I mean, I don't know the difference. So that sounds crazy, but I guess, one thing that I talk to my audience about on Culture Apothecary, which is my podcast, is that sometimes our gut instinct, sometimes common sense, is going to trump a study. And one of the biggest indicators, it was a bombshell report by the Washington Post this year showing that big food was paying a lot, tens of thousands of dollars, to nutritionists on TikTok to be saying things like, Coke isn't that bad for you, and Lucky Charms is healthier than ground beef, that ultra processed food isn't that bad for you. These people are being paid. It's really, really disturbing and super scary, and that's influencing a lot of young people.
It sounds like Kamala Harris's all of her celebrity bandmates that went out there that we find out after the fact. Oh, you're all getting paid. You mentioned Bobby Kennedy and Fruit Loops and everything. I want to take you down a rabbit hole on this because it's funny. The first one, and you tweeted about this because the New York Times fact-checked him on Fruit Loops, and you wrote, the journalist who wrote this is probably one of those who thinks her college degree makes her smarter than one. But for the audience, let me just write this. This is what read this, because this is what the New York Times wrote out there. Mr. Kennedy has singled out Fruit Loops as an example of a product with too many artificial ingredients, questioning why the Canadian version has fewer than the U.S. version. But he was wrong. The ingredient list is roughly the same. Although Canada's natural colorings made from blueberries and carrots, while the U.S. product contains red dye 40, yellow dye 5, blue dye 1, and bilated hydrotoluene, or BHI, a lab-made chemical for freshness. So, yeah, I mean, listen, it's basically the same. The Canadians use derivatives of fruits and vegetables. We use red dye 5 or red dye 40 and yellow 5. But I mean, who cares? I mean, that may be the dumbest fact check I've ever heard. It's completely wrong, except he's 100% right.
Yeah, and that's how it always goes. If you open up like those little fact checks on Instagram or Facebook, a lot of the times where it says like, well, this is partly true or partly false, you read it and the fact check sounds basically like that. It's just like a weird roundabout way of I don't know, somehow getting that label on there, because the problem is majority of people are going to read that headline, see it was fact checked, and then they're not going to investigate the reasoning and see that this whole thing is bogus. But the New York Times fact check that you just read, I mean, you don't hate these people enough. That really was, they put a spotlight on what the entire problem is with the establishment media. They fact check, they say we're wrong, and then in their explanation admit that we're right, and then they just change the sentence structure. So this is an exact example, Sean, of why the Democrats lost the election. This is the epitome of gaslighting the American people. Let me remind your viewers that it was not the conservative red state of Florida who banned all artificial dyes 6 weeks ago. No, that was very deep blue California, after reviewing undeniable evidence that these artificial dyes in our food are doing extreme damage to human health, especially our children. It was California. It was Democrat California who passed a bill banning all foods containing any of the 6 artificial food dyes from public schools. That includes Fruit Loops. This is the New York Times, again, another outlet funded by pharma. 77% of young adults do not qualify for the military based on their health scores in the United States. National security issue. 10% of kids have fatty liver disease. 50% of American young adults are overweight or obese. 1/3 of young adults have pre-diabetes. Sperm count down 50% in 40 years. 40% of 18-year-olds meet the criteria for a mental health disorder. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young adults. And then you have New York Times pretending there's a fact check on us talking about the danger of artificial dyes, which is unnecessary. Or you have The Atlantic calling people like me who testified at the Senate about the chronic disease crisis and wanting to ban these artificial dyes, accusing us of wanting to make Fruit Loops boring. What is there to argue with, I guess, is the question you should be asking. This is so nonpartisan. Again, if anyone has any other opinions on this, you have to ask why.
But don't you? But look, here's what I look. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor, but I can understand reason, right? So we look at the evolution of cancer, of obesity, of all of these issues that you just mentioned, suicide rates, everything else, and go, okay, it's not like everyone in the world. We're isolated in that. And so what is different between us and Europe, us and Japan? It's our diet. It's what we're putting in our bodies. And then we go, gosh, maybe that's the problem. And we're told, to your point, we're gaslit by saying, don't you dare come after big food. It's got to be something else. But I don't think it takes an advanced degree to say, gosh, the only thing different between us and these other countries is our diet.
Right. And I believe that we allow, I think, over 8,000 chemicals in our food. And out of that list, Europe allows 3. So one of the arguments from big food is, uh, that we cannot rely on the standards of these other countries, that overregulates, stifles innovation. They'll say that, we'll end up banning new chemicals that could be great prematurely. And so my question would be, do big food and the Democrats and whoever is opposed to this agenda, do they have the same energy when it comes to trusting these other countries with nuclear weapons? Other countries who have chosen to ban these cancer causing and behavior altering ingredients like artificial dyes have proved that it is absolutely possible to have thriving companies while also prioritizing the health of its citizens. This isn't hard. The rest of the world has been able to do this. Why haven't we? These are the questions you need to be asking our elected officials, that you need to be posting about on social media. You need to be talking about the Kellogg's boycott that people like Jason Karp of Hugh Chocolate and Vani Hari, the Food Babe, and me and Callie Means have all protested in the last couple months. We went to the Kellogg's headquarters in Michigan. We protested their use of artificial dyes in our cereals. Most people do not realize when we talk about this, they're like, well, it's probably really expensive or really hard for them to make this new formula of cereal. Here's the thing. Kellogg's is making the cleaner version of their cereals in the United States already. So they're literally creating there's a tub of the cleaner. It's still not good by any means, but the point is it's a cleaner version, and then they've got the poison version for the American kids, and then they're willing to send the cleaner version to the rest of the world for the other kids. Why is that happening? Why do we allow them to do that? Now, what can happen is what California did. California, you won't hear me saying this often, but this is great. Other states should copy California and ban artificial dyes from the food, from their public school lunches. Because the thing is these companies are going to be forced then, okay, well, am I going to keep making 2 separate batches, or am I just going to combine them all into one, for other countries and American kids? It's really, really simple. But when we were at Kellogg's, they refused to meet with us. And then Kellogg's had an employee hold a sign in the window that said, "Get off our lawn." So that tells you how they feel. And by the way, it wasn't just a bunch of adults. This was thousands of American moms and their children who were holding signs saying, "Please stop poisoning us. Please stop poisoning us, Kellogg's." A 8-year-old girl. And they didn't want to meet with us, and they still haven't. They've ignored all of us on social media. And then yesterday, they posted for the first time in months, Kellogg's posted on Instagram saying that they were partnering with like the Epilepsy Foundation. They're going to be giving out cereal to benefit epilepsy. The cereal with the ingredients that exacerbates epilepsy, they're saying they're going to give that away to raise money. It's so evil. It'd be like an oncologist handing out cigarettes to their patients. It doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot that needs to change that I believe RFK Jr. is going to be able to do.
By the way, as they're talking about this, I just thought to myself, when it comes to admissions, California has a standard, and textbooks, I think Texas has a standard, and everyone else just sort of conforms to it because they go, well, we make enough, if we're going to have to conform to them. So it'll be interesting to see if people now conform to the California standard on food, because they do it with respect to cars, they do it with respect to textbooks, because enough is purchased from that one state. So to your point, I will be interested to see over the next couple of months whether people go, all right, if we got to follow the California rule when it comes to processed food and artificial dyes, maybe we should do it. Alex, I love the podcast. I love the what you bring to the conversation. I love the guests that you get. And obviously just on a personal level, I love how you've evolved the show that you have, because it's grown so much, and the audience has been phenomenal to watch blossom the way you have.
Thank you, Sean. I adore you. You have been like the nicest person to me in conservative politics since the beginning. And you are such a great friend, and I appreciate you so much. And be looking at Texas. Texas has been holding state Senate hearings on artificial dyes in the last week. So it's ramping up. You know, Texas wants to be ahead. They want to be at the beginning of this game. They're not going to let California have too much of a win, right? So be looking at Texas. That's super excited. But for anybody who's never watched my show or listened, it's Culture Apothecary. You can listen to it anywhere.
We'll link to it in the show.
Yeah, link to it in the show. You can listen to it anywhere. New episodes every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Awesome. Alex, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.